While we spend a lot of time in this show focusing on platforms and policy, there is a group of professionals on the front line, so to speak, and behind the scenes for some of the most significant political and policy battles.
Lobbyists. They're the influencers working on behalf of citizens and causes for all sorts of issues on both sides of the aisle. Today, The Hill announced its annual top lobbyist list, which includes members of United Steelworkers, Facebook, the National Education Association, and many, many more. Joining us to explain how the top lobbyists are chosen is reporter for The Hill, Alex Gangitano. Great to see you, Alex.
Great to see you guys.
So how do you put this list together? What's the criteria? And then what are the different sort of breakdowns of different types of lobbyists?
Yeah, so we take nominations. That was last month. And people who nominate range from PR folks in DC, people at trade associations will nominate, you know, the top lobbyists.
So people work to be on this list.
Yeah, they lobby to be on the lobbyist list.
On the lobbyist list. Got it.
I'm sure it's great. That's great for clients, right? I was on the Hill's top 5 lobbyists list.
Totally.
Oftentimes, if you look at their bio on their company's website, they'll say all the years they were on the Hill's top lobbyist list.
Wow.
And sometimes even members of Congress will nominate people, which is kind of cool to see.
This is a heavy responsibility. You're like making or breaking these people's dreams, crushing their hopes.
So because of that, we usually, you're not guaranteed to be on the list if you're on the previous year.
Yes.
But, you know, there would probably have to be a reason to be taken off of the list. So that's why it's also so long.
I mean, so the whole idea behind this, I think, it's interesting because, I mean, we even have friends of the show who are in there, Chuck Rocha and Estuardo Rodriguez, 2 guests here, who come often trying to, as somebody who covers the lobbying industry, I mean, look, money in our politics, that's what we talk about here on this show every single day. Lay out, I mean, the range of issues, of moneyed interests that are in Washington. And I think just how powerful some of these people are. Yeah,
and I definitely had to think about the legislative battles that were taking place this year and how that makes certain lobbyists more relevant or more busy throughout the year. Like last year, we had people who worked very heavily on the tax bill. This year, there's a big trade focus. And so the folks from trade associations like the manufacturers, the equipment manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, all, you know, belonged on the list because they were so active on the USMCA and the China tariff. Lobbying for that. So you do have to kind of think about the legislative battles as well. And then the hired gun section of the list, which is the big law firms that have lobbying and the lobbying shops, they get, you know, hired by clients to work on these huge issues. So that's something I track all year is how many of these lobbying shops get these big clients to work on these big bills.
Well, and often it's not like the big bill itself. It's they're working to get some loophole, some little goodie that's good for their company or their industry, et cetera. Just speak to that, like how the nuance goes into this.
Yeah, a huge thing that we had this year was companies hiring lobbyists to work on exemptions for all these tariffs, you know, and try to get what you said, like the loopholes and these small things that matter so much to this one company, especially also these companies that are smaller, you know, outside of DC. They need help in DC as much as they can, and they need to kind of fight regulations or even need help navigating this impeachment process. And that's what lobbyists, even when there's not a lot going on legislative-wise on the Hill, lobbyists are there to answer questions about timing and, you know, what will 2020 look like and things like that, which, you know, everyone outside of DC is kind of sometimes in the dark about. Even here in DC, I think sometimes we're in the dark about.
That's the funny thing, right? Is like, it's what a system we have in which these outside money interests are the ones who have the expertise that these congressmen can rely on. I just think that's a crazy system that we live in. Who do you think the most effective lobby of 2019 has been of an industry?
Interesting. So most effective company or most effective?
Yeah, whatever comes to mind. Yeah. Who got their way?
Interesting one. I think NAM had a great year, the National Association of Manufacturers. Jay Timmons, their president's on the list. And they're someone who has worked closely with President Trump on trade issues. Even getting the XM Bank reauthorized was a big one for them.
Right.
So I think they really shine this year. Of course, the Chamber of Commerce always has a big year. The American Petroleum Institute always has a big year.
The story of our country is that the Chamber of Commerce always has a big year.
Regardless of who is president, these are the people who always have the power.
I mean, but it's so important that you cover this because I think that people have a sense of what goes on, and they know that these are the people that have the ear of their legislators, and that their legislators really rely on, because they don't have all the expertise. They don't have time to read through the text of every bill and every detail. So in many ways, these are the people who are not only informing our legislators, but also influencing our legislators. People know that generally, but to see the specifics around it, I think is really important. Like, these are the people who are writing the trade deal, right? These are the people who are getting their goodies and their perks in the tax bill, right?
Exactly.
And it's not just industry, right? United Steelworkers is on here. Like Citizens Against Government Waste is on here. Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. There's a lot of other types. So talk about those groups maybe, who we might not associate with lobbying, but still have to pay lobbyists.
Right, and those folks are the ones that are really helping out people out in the country who need this DC representation. I mean, AFL-CIO is also on here, like labor unions, and they might not be registered as lobbyists. Oftentimes they're not, and that's a caveat that we have in here, is that you could be working as kind of more of a grassroots advocacy effort. But you're not necessarily a registered lobbyist, but those people are basically giving a voice to their members of their union or whatever it might be. And another interesting thing about this year is that we have a divided government. And so, a progressive group is just as important as a super conservative group this year. It's not like you have to be a Democratic lobbyist in order to have influence right now with the president and with the Senate being Republican.
Wow. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great to have you.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, new polling from the two states with the most electoral votes tell completely different stories. One's got Biden and Sanders neck and neck, and the other has Biden outpacing Sanders by quite a bit.
Can you guess which states? Our panel is next, and they're going to dissect those polls, chop it up, and much more when Rising continues.